Senior Audit Officer Thomas Fletcher adjusted his regulation tie for the 14th time that morning and wondered, not for the first time, why the Grand Ceasefire Congress couldn't have been held somewhere with normal gravity. Station Meridian's rotating sections meant that, depending on which deck you were on, you either felt like you were carrying a small planet on your shoulders or floating away like a particularly boring balloon. The diplomatic wing, naturally, had been assigned the heaviest gravity setting. Apparently, weighty matters required weighty circumstances. He clutched his leather satchel containing 3 calculators, 1 primary, 1 backup, 17 pens in various colors, and a stack of ledgers that had kept him awake for the past 6 weeks. The supply chain discrepancies he'd uncovered should have been routine, a few decimal points out of place, maybe some clerical errors that could be fixed with a strongly worded memo. Instead, the numbers told a story that made his accounting-trained mind break out in a cold sweat every time he thought about it. The Congress Hall stretched before him like a cathedral designed by committee. Massive holographic displays showed real-time translations in 47 languages, though Fletcher noticed the Centauri delegate seemed to be having an animated argument with his translation matrix about the proper pronunciation of ceasefire. The matrix kept suggesting cheese fire, which was causing some diplomatic confusion. Fletcher had arrived early with one mission: find the most inconspicuous seat possible and become one with the furniture. His orders from Admiral Chen had been crystal clear: attend, observe, keep his mouth shut, and under no circumstances discuss his findings with anyone. The phrase career-ending consequences had been mentioned several times, along with some creative suggestions about what they'd do with his pension if he caused any diplomatic incidents. He spotted the perfect bench in the back corner, far from the main proceedings, partially hidden by a decorative pillar that appeared to be growing some kind of sentient moss, and positioned directly under a ventilation duct that would muffle any accidental sounds he might make. Fletcher settled onto the bench with the satisfaction of a man who had successfully achieved bureaucratic invisibility. The hall filled with an impressive array of beings from across known space. Human delegates in crisp uniforms mingled with the crystalline Nexari, whose bodies chimed softly when they moved. The aquatic hydros had brought their mobility tanks, creating an interesting obstacle course for the waitstaff carrying trays of what Fletcher hoped were appetizers and not diplomatic gifts. In one corner, a group of energy beings flickered between visible and invisible states, apparently playing some kind of cosmic hide-and-seek that was making the security scanners very unhappy. Fletcher was just settling into his role as professional wallflower when someone sat down beside him. He glanced over politely, intending to offer a brief nod of acknowledgement, and nearly dropped his satchel. The woman beside him possessed an otherworldly elegance that made the diplomatic corps look like they'd been assembled from a discount catalog. Her features were distinctly humanoid, but her ears extended gracefully upward in elegant points that caught the station's artificial lighting. Her silver-blue hair was arranged in an intricate style that probably required advanced engineering, and her clothing seemed to shimmer with embedded fiber optics that pulsed in gentle, hypnotic patterns. Fletcher's brain, trained in the art of bureaucratic panic, immediately began cataloging everything he knew about the Veiltheran coalition. Queen Lyrale, supreme ruler of 14 star systems, commander of fleets that could turn planets into abstract art, and according to his security briefings, someone who could allegedly read minds, bend spacetime, and probably calculate compound interest faster than his backup calculator. A second figure settled on his other side, clearly the Queen's daughter, Princess Zara, who appeared to be around 16 in human years, and was currently examining his shoes with the intense focus of a xenobiologist discovering a new species. "Those are interesting," the princess said, her voice carrying the kind of musical quality that suggested her vocal cords had been personally tuned by the universe itself. "Are they supposed to look like that, Or is this some kind of human camouflage technique? Fletcher looked down at his standard-issue dress shoes, black, practical and worn to a comfortable state of aggressive mediocrity. There. Regulation, he managed. Fascinating, Princess Zara continued, pulling out what appeared to be a small crystalline device and scanning his footwear. The synthetic materials suggest a civilization that has mastered molecular engineering, but chooses to make things that look deliberately uninteresting. Is this a cultural preference or a defense mechanism? Before Fletcher could formulate a response that wouldn't sound like a diplomatic incident waiting to happen, he became aware that the Congress Hall had fallen into the kind of silence usually reserved for natural disasters or tax audits. Every conversation had stopped. Every head had turned in their direction. Even the sentient moss on the pillar seemed to be leaning toward them with what might have been curiosity. Queen Lyrelay spoke for the first time, her voice carrying easily across the suddenly quiet hall. "Officer Fletcher, I believe we need to discuss supply manifests." Fletcher felt his carefully constructed invisibility evaporate like a pension plan in a market crash. Across the hall, Admiral Chen's face had achieved a shade of red that wasn't technically possible under normal physics. While various diplomatic officials were frantically consulting their tablets, with the desperation of students who had just realized the final exam was written in a language they'd never seen before. "Your Majesty," Fletcher began, then stopped, because he had absolutely no idea what came after that. His training hadn't covered protocols for accidentally becoming the center of intergalactic attention while sitting on what was supposed to be the least important bench in known space. Princess Zara was now examining his satchel with the same scientific intensity she'd applied to his shoes. "This leather construction suggests you place significant value on document security. Are these the legendary human ledgers we've heard so much about?" "They're just accounting records," Fletcher said, clutching the satchel protectively. "Very boring accounting records, incredibly boring. You'd probably fall asleep just looking at them." "Oh, I doubt that," Queen Lyrelay said, and Fletcher caught something in her tone that made his auditor instincts tingle with warning. "Numbers tell the most interesting stories, don't you think? Especially when they don't quite add up the way they should." Around them, security forces had begun moving with the kind of subtle urgency that suggested someone somewhere was having a very bad day. Fletcher noticed Admiral Chen making frantic hand gestures that probably weren't covered in standard diplomatic sign language. Princess Zara had somehow acquired what appeared to be a bag of exotic snacks and was offering them to Fletcher. "Would you like some crystallized nebula fruit? It's from the Andorian systems. Very good for maintaining blood sugar during extended mathematical discussions." Fletcher accepted a piece automatically, his mind racing through everything he knew about diplomatic protocol, which he realized with growing horror was absolutely nothing useful for his current situation. The fruit tasted like starlight and anxiety. "Officer Fletcher," Queen Lyrelay continued, her tone conversational despite the fact that half the Congress seemed to be either approaching or retreating from their bench, depending on their individual levels of panic. "I understand you've been conducting audits of the supply distribution networks." That's classified, Your Majesty," Fletcher managed, wondering if there was a regulation somewhere covering accidentally sharing state secrets with alien royalty because they asked nicely. "Oh, of course it is," Princess Zara said cheerfully, offering him another piece of nebula fruit. "Most interesting things are classified. It's like putting a sign on something that says, 'Please pay attention to this.'" Fletcher was beginning to suspect that his morning had taken a turn toward the cosmically significant, and he wasn't entirely sure his pension plan covered acts of accidental diplomacy. Around them, the Congress Hall buzzed with the kind of urgent whispers that suggested very important people were about to make very dramatic decisions about his immediate future. Fletcher was contemplating whether his career had just ended or evolved into something entirely unrecognizable, when a tall man in ceremonial robes approached their bench. The man's uniform suggested he was either a high-ranking official or possibly the station's head of costume design. It was difficult to tell the difference at diplomatic functions. "Your Majesty," the official said, bowing so low that Fletcher worried about his spine, "I'm Protocol Officer Hendricks. I believe there may be some confusion about seating arrangements." Princess Zara looked up from her scientific examination of Fletcher's satchel clasp. "Oh, there's no confusion. We're exactly where we intended to be." "But surely," Hendricks continued, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the station's climate control, "the royal delegation would be more comfortable in the designated diplomatic section. We have chairs that adjust to 17 different anatomical configurations and complementary gravitational dampening fields." Queen Lyrale smiled with the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining basic mathematics to particularly slow computers. "Officer Hendricks, are you familiar with the listening vigil protocols?" The color drained from Hendricks' face so quickly that Fletcher wondered if the station's medical bay stocked emergency blood pressure medication. "Your Majesty, surely you don't mean Article 7 of the Intersystem Diplomatic Codex," Princess Zara recited cheerfully while offering Fletcher what appeared to be a pastry that was gently glowing. "When a royal witness takes position beside a testimony bearer during formal proceedings, the listening vigil commences automatically. Duration, 12 standard hours. Legal weight of testimony. Supersedes ministerial statements, military briefings, and—" She paused dramatically, coffee vendor gossip. Fletcher choked slightly on the glowing pastry, which tasted like cinnamon and what he could only describe as the concept of purple. 12 hours. Standard hours, Queen Lyrale clarified helpfully. Though on station meridian with the temporal adjustment fields, it's actually closer to 11 hours and 47 minutes ship time. "I need to use the restroom," Fletcher said with the desperation of a man who had just realized he was trapped in cosmic bureaucracy. Protocol Officer Hendricks looked like he was about to faint. "Sir, I'm afraid that breaking the vigil perimeter would constitute a violation of 17 interstellar treaties, and possibly an act of war against the Veiltheran coalition." "What if I really need to go?" Fletcher asked. Princess Zara consulted her crystalline device. "According to my cultural database, humans can typically maintain biological functions for several hours without significant discomfort. Would you like me to activate the station's biostasis field? It temporarily suspends non-essential bodily processes." "That sounds worse than just waiting," Fletcher admitted. "Oh, it is," Princess Zara agreed cheerfully. "Last time Mother used it during a trade negotiation, she couldn't taste anything for 3 weeks. Everything tasted like recycled air filters." Around them, the Congress Hall had transformed into a carefully choreographed dance of officials trying to approach without actually approaching. Fletcher watched a group of military advisors huddled behind a decorative fountain, apparently engaged in heated debate about something involving hand gestures and what looked like a flow chart. "Officer Fletcher," Queen Lyrale said, settling more comfortably on the bench, "perhaps you could tell us about those supply manifests. I'm particularly interested in the discrepancies you've identified in medical supply shipments to the refugee sectors." Fletcher's auditor instincts warred with his self-preservation instincts. The auditor won, probably because it had been practicing longer. "The medical supplies are actually one of the smaller irregularities, Your Majesty. The food distribution networks show much more significant variance patterns." Princess Zara perked up like a student who had just discovered their homework was actually interesting. "What kind of variance patterns?" "Well," Fletcher began, pulling out his primary calculator, "if you look at the declared shipping weights versus the received weights, accounting for normal transport losses and consumption during transit." He paused, remembering Admiral Chen's explicit instructions about keeping his mouth shut. "Go on," Queen Lyrale encouraged. Remember, within the vigil perimeter, your testimony carries legal weight equivalent to a cabinet-level briefing. Is that good or bad for my pension? Fletcher asked. Depends on whether you're planning to retire in a cell or a palace, Princess Zara said helpfully. Fletcher opened his ledger, and the numbers seemed to leap off the page with renewed urgency. The discrepancies follow a pattern. Food shipments to Sector 7 consistently show up 20% lighter than manifest. Medical supplies to the Outer Rim refugee camps are routinely delayed by an average of 6 weeks, but the delay paperwork is always filed exactly 48 hours before the scheduled delivery date. That's oddly specific, Princess Zara observed, now taking notes on her crystalline device. That's what caught my attention, Fletcher continued, warming to his subject despite the growing crowd of nervous officials gathering at increasingly creative distances from their bench. You can't file delay paperwork before you know there's going to be a delay, unless you know there's going to be a delay because you're causing it, Queen Lyreley finished. Fletcher nodded, then stopped. I probably shouldn't be discussing this with the Supreme Commander of the Vale-Theron Relief Fleets, Princess Zara asked innocently. The ones that have been supplementing the shortfalls in human supply distribution for the past 8 months. Fletcher's calculator slipped from his fingers. You've been tracking our supply shortages. Oh, we've been tracking much more than that, Queen Lyreley said. For instance, are you aware that the biosignatures on your quantum-sealed shipping containers show signs of premature opening and resealing? That's impossible, Fletcher said automatically. Quantum seals can only be opened with authorized genetic signatures and the encryption protocols. He stopped, his auditor brain catching up with the implications. If the quantum seals were being broken and resealed, someone with very high-level access was intercepting shipments. Someone with the kind of clearance that would put them well above Fletcher's pay grade and suspicion level. Princess Zara offered him another glowing pastry. Would you like some more stress food? This one tastes like chocolate and the concept of justice. I think I'm starting to understand why you sat next to me, Fletcher said slowly. Are you? Queen Lyreley asked. Because I suspect you understand much more than you realize. For instance, what do you make of the fact that every delayed medical shipment eventually reaches its destination exactly 1 day after local news outlets report critical shortages? Fletcher's backup calculator joined his primary on the floor. And, Princess Zara prompted, apparently enjoying her role as cosmic tutor. And they're selling the intercepted supplies on secondary markets to fund. Fletcher's voice trailed off as the full scope of what he was describing hit him. To fund continued conflict operations, Queen Lyreley said quietly. Prolonging the war by creating the very shortages that justify continued military expenditure. Around them, the security perimeter had grown notably tighter. Fletcher noticed that Admiral Chen was now engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly animated conversation with a group of officials whose uniforms suggested they outranked everyone Fletcher had ever met. This is bigger than supply chain irregularities, Fletcher said, the words coming out in a rush. This is systematic war profiteering on an interstellar scale. Now you're getting it, Princess Zara said, offering him what appeared to be a beverage that was changing colors in real time. Try the emotion juice. It's supposed to taste like whatever you're feeling. Right now, it's probably going to taste like existential crisis with notes of bureaucratic terror. Fletcher accepted the drink and discovered it tasted exactly like that moment when you realize your quiet, boring job has just become the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Fletcher was discovering that existential crisis really did have a distinctive flavor profile when a new figure approached their bench. This one wore the kind of expensive suit that suggested either diplomatic immunity or excellent health insurance, and his smile had the artificial quality of someone who had practiced it in front of a mirror until it achieved the perfect balance of warmth and threat. Your Majesty, Officer Fletcher, the man said with a bow that managed to be respectful and condescending simultaneously. "I'm Trade Minister Blackwood. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding about the nature of these proceedings." Princess Zara looked up from her device, where she appeared to be running some kind of probability analysis on Fletcher's testimony. "Oh, there's no misunderstanding, Minister. We're conducting a perfectly legal audit review under listening vigil protocols. Would you like to contribute? I have 17 different flavors of truth serum if you're feeling shy." Blackwood's smile flickered like a hologram with a power fluctuation. "I'm sure that won't be necessary, Princess. Officer Fletcher, surely you understand that supply chain management involves complexities that can't be reduced to simple mathematical equations." Fletcher clutched his backup calculator protectively. "Actually, Minister, most complexities can be reduced to mathematical equations. That's kind of the point of mathematics." "But context matters," Blackwood continued, his voice taking on the persuasive tone of someone selling swampland on a desert planet. "Those delayed shipments you mentioned, they're the result of increased security protocols implemented after the Centauri incident." Queen Lyreley tilted her head with the curious expression of someone who had just heard a fascinating new form of creative fiction. "Minister Blackwood, are you referring to the Centauri incident that occurred 3 months after the first documented delays in Officer Fletcher's records?" "Time flows differently in hyperspace," Blackwood said quickly. "The security protocols were retroactively implemented to ensure." "That's not how causality works," Princess Zara interrupted cheerfully. "I mean, unless you've developed temporal manipulation technology, which would be incredibly illegal under the chronological interference accords of 2387. Have you developed temporal manipulation technology? Because that would make this conversation much more interesting." Fletcher found himself developing a deep appreciation for Princess Zara's ability to derail conversations, while simultaneously making them more terrifying. "Minister," he said, consulting his ledgers, "the security protocol documentation is dated 6 months after the delays began. Also, the protocols you referenced don't actually exist in the official registry." Blackwood's smile was now barely visible to the naked eye. "Perhaps there are classification levels you're not privy to, Officer Fletcher." "Perhaps," Fletcher agreed. "But I do have access to the quantum encryption logs for every sealed container, and those show unauthorized access patterns that predate your fictional security protocols by almost a year." "Fictional?" Blackwood's voice rose slightly, attracting attention from the growing crowd of officials who were finding increasingly creative ways to eavesdrop without technically approaching the vigil perimeter. Princess Zara consulted her device again. "My analysis shows that Minister Blackwood's stress hormones have increased by 47% since he approached our bench. That's typically associated with either cardiovascular exercise or the fear of imminent career termination." "I haven't been exercising," Blackwood said faintly. "No, you haven't," Princess Zara agreed. "Your muscle tone suggests a lifestyle primarily consisting of desk work, and what my scanner identifies as an excessive fondness for imported Diluvian pastries." Fletcher was beginning to understand why Princess Zara might be considered a diplomatic asset. Her ability to deliver devastating observations while maintaining the demeanor of a helpful research assistant was genuinely impressive. "Officer Fletcher," Queen Lyreley said, drawing their attention back to the ledgers, "what do your records show about the correlation between delayed shipments and fluctuations in secondary market pricing?" Fletcher flipped through several pages, his auditor instincts fully engaged despite the cosmic significance of his audience. "The correlations are almost perfect, Your Majesty. Every time a food shipment is delayed to a refugee sector, prices in that sector's secondary markets increase by an average of 37% within 48 hours. And the medical supplies, even more dramatic. Delayed medical shipments correlate with price increases of up to 300%, particularly for emergency medications and surgical supplies. Minister Blackwood had gone very quiet, which Fletcher's experience suggested was usually a bad sign in powerful people. Princess Zara looked up from her device with the expression of someone who had just solved a particularly entertaining puzzle. Minister Blackwood, my analysis shows that you've purchased significant holdings in 17 different secondary market trading companies over the past 2 years. Isn't that an interesting coincidence? Those are legitimate investments, Blackwood said, his voice tight. Oh, I'm sure they are, Princess Zara agreed. It's just fascinating how legitimate investments can sometimes accidentally align with market manipulation schemes. It's like accidentally becoming incredibly wealthy while people accidentally starve. Fletcher was starting to understand that Princess Zara's definition of accident might be more flexible than most people's. Your Majesty, Blackwood said, turning to Queen Lyreley with the desperation of someone who had just realized his hole was much deeper than anticipated. Surely you understand that trade relationships require a certain degree of flexibility. These minor adjustments to supply timing. Minor adjustments. Fletcher interrupted, his professional indignation overriding his sense of self-preservation. Minister, according to my calculations, your minor adjustments have resulted in approximately 47,000 tons of food supplies and 38,000 units of medical equipment being diverted from their intended recipients over the past 18 months. That translates to approximately 200,000 people experiencing artificial shortages, Queen Lyreley added quietly. 200,000 people who have been going without food and medical care so that secondary market prices could be manipulated for profit. The Congress Hall had grown noticeably quieter, as if the various diplomatic missions had collectively decided that discretion was the better part of not being associated with whatever was happening around the corner bench. Minister Blackwood looked around at the growing attention their conversation was attracting and seemed to realize that his options were rapidly diminishing. This is all speculation and circumstantial evidence. You can't prove. Actually, Princess Zara said brightly, we can. Mother has been recording this entire conversation using quantum-encrypted diplomatic protocols. The recording will be automatically distributed to all member governments in approximately 6 hours, unless the vigil concludes with satisfactory resolution. Fletcher blinked. You've been recording everything. Oh yes, Queen Lyreley confirmed. It's standard protocol for listening vigils. All testimony is preserved and verified through quantum encryption to prevent tampering. Very useful for preventing people from accidentally forgetting what they've said. Minister Blackwood appeared to be having some kind of internal crisis that was manifesting as visible trembling. Your Majesty, surely we can discuss this privately. Minister, Princess Zara said gently, privacy isn't really an option during a listening vigil. That's rather the point. It's like being interviewed by the universe itself, except the universe keeps detailed records and has an excellent memory. Fletcher was beginning to appreciate the elegant brutality of Valetheran diplomatic protocols. Minister Blackwood, he said, consulting his ledgers again, would you like to explain why your signature appears on 43 different shipping delay authorizations, all of which cite security concerns that weren't implemented until months later? Blackwood's silence stretched long enough that Fletcher began to wonder if the man had achieved some kind of diplomatic suspended animation. Fletcher checked his chronometer and discovered that somehow 11 hours had passed while he'd been systematically dismantling what appeared to be the largest corruption scandal in recent galactic history. His back ached from the bench, his throat was dry from talking, and he was fairly certain he'd consumed enough of Princess Zara's exotic snacks to qualify as a minor diplomatic incident in their own right. 1 hour remaining, Queen Lyreley announced, and Fletcher noticed that the Congress Hall had transformed into something resembling a war room. Officials huddled in corners, communication devices chirped constantly, and Admiral Chen appeared to be having what looked like a nervous breakdown behind a decorative plant that was trying to offer him comfort via bioluminescent patterns. Minister Blackwood had long since retreated, presumably to update his resume and possibly his will. In his place, a parade of increasingly high-ranking officials had attempted to approach their bench, each offering creative interpretations of why the listening vigil should be terminated early for reasons ranging from administrative efficiency to cosmic realignment protocols, which Princess Zara had cheerfully debunked using her apparently encyclopedic knowledge of interstellar law. "Your Majesty," Fletcher said, settling his ledgers in his lap, "I have to ask, did you really choose to sit next to me randomly, or was this planned?" Princess Zara looked up from her device, where she'd been tracking what appeared to be real-time market fluctuations across 17 star systems. "Oh, Mother's been monitoring your audit work for months. Your reports kept correlating with our intelligence about supply shortages in refugee sectors." "You've been spying on my accounting?" Fletcher asked. "Technically, we've been protecting your accounting," Queen Lyreley corrected. "3 different groups have attempted to access your files using increasingly sophisticated quantum infiltration techniques. Our security algorithms have been running interference." Fletcher processed this information and decided it explained why his computer had been running unusually well lately. "So when you sat next to me, I was confirming what we already suspected," Queen Lyreley said. "That you're either incredibly brave or incredibly naive, and both qualities make you exactly the right person to bear witness to what we've discovered." "I vote for naive," Fletcher said. "This morning I thought my biggest problem was explaining a 2% variance in food distribution efficiency." Princess Zara consulted her chronometer. "Speaking of problems, in approximately 57 minutes, I need to ask you a very important question, and your answer will determine whether several million people get to eat regularly or whether we all get to watch a war restart." Fletcher felt his stomach perform what could only be described as an interpretive dance routine. "What kind of question?" "The kind that comes at the end of every listening vigil," Queen Lyreley said. "I have to formally ask you to confirm your testimony and accept the consequences of its implementation." "Which are?" "Well," Princess Zara said cheerfully, "if you confirm, the quantum-encrypted recordings of everything we've discussed become legally binding evidence in all member governments simultaneously. The automated systems will begin redistributing hoarded supplies within hours. Several dozen people will probably be arrested, and trade relationships across multiple star systems will be restructured. And if I don't confirm, then officially this conversation never happened. You go back to your quiet audit job, and everyone pretends the refugee shortages are just an unfortunate side effect of post-war logistics challenges." Fletcher looked around the Congress Hall, noting the increasing desperation of the officials who were still trying to find ways to interrupt their vigil without violating 17 different treaties. "And the war probably restarts within 6 months, Queen Lyreley said matter-of-factly. "Artificial scarcity tends to breed the kind of resentment that makes peace negotiations irrelevant." "No pressure," Princess Zara added helpfully. Fletcher opened his primary ledger and stared at the numbers that had started this entire cosmic adventure. 12 hours ago, they'd been just irregularities in shipping manifests. Now they represented the difference between peace and war, between life and death for millions of people, and between Fletcher remaining an anonymous bureaucrat or becoming the person who'd accidentally saved the galaxy through aggressive accounting. "There's something I should probably mention," he said slowly. "When I first started noticing these discrepancies, I ran probability analyses to see if they could be explained by random factors." "And," Queen Lyreley prompted, "the odds against these patterns occurring naturally are approximately 400 billion to 1. Princess Zara's device chirped with what sounded like mechanical laughter. So you knew this was deliberate manipulation from the beginning. I suspected, Fletcher admitted. But suspecting and proving are different things. And suspecting and having the authority to do something about it are even more different things. Authority can be temporary, Queen Lyreley said. But evidence is eternal. Your calculations, your observations, your testimony, they've created a record that can't be ignored or buried. Fletcher checked his chronometer again, 43 minutes remaining. Around them, he could see the final preparations being made. Communication arrays were aligning, recording devices were calibrating, and somewhere in the administrative depths of Station Meridian, automated systems were preparing to either execute the largest supply redistribution in galactic history or file the most comprehensive incident report ever written. I have another question, Fletcher said. Why couldn't you have just exposed this conspiracy yourselves? You obviously had the intelligence and the authority. Princess Zara exchanged a look with her mother that suggested this was a question they'd anticipated. Because accusations from alien governments against human officials look like warfare by other means. But testimony from a human auditor, given freely during a legally recognized diplomatic protocol, looks like justice. Also, Queen Lyreley added, we needed someone whose integrity was absolutely unquestionable. Someone whose entire career had been built on finding the truth in numbers, regardless of how inconvenient that truth might be. Fletcher realized he was holding his breath and made a conscious effort to resume normal respiratory functions. So you're saying my complete lack of political ambition and social skills actually qualified me for something important? Your complete lack of political ambition and social skills made you the only person in this Congress who couldn't be bought, intimidated, or convinced to overlook genocide for the sake of convenience, Princess Zara corrected. Genocide? Fletcher's voice cracked slightly. Systematic deprivation of food and medical supplies to civilian populations, Queen Lyreley said quietly. That's the legal definition. The fact that it was done for profit, rather than ethnic hatred, doesn't change the classification. Fletcher stared at his ledgers, seeing them now not as accounting records, but as evidence of crimes that violated every principle he'd ever believed in. The numbers hadn't changed, but their meaning had transformed completely. Time, Princess Zara announced. Queen Lyreley stood gracefully, and Fletcher noticed that the entire Congress Hall had gone silent. Even the background hum of station systems seemed to have quieted in anticipation. Officer Thomas Fletcher, Queen Lyreley said, her voice carrying across the hall with ceremonial formality. Do you confirm the testimony you have given during this listening vigil, knowing that your confirmation will trigger immediate legal and administrative consequences across all member governments? Fletcher stood slowly, his legs stiff from 11 hours on an uncomfortable bench. He looked around the hall at faces representing dozens of worlds, hundreds of political factions, and millions of people who would be affected by his answer. Your Majesty, he said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice, I confirm my testimony. The numbers don't lie, and neither will I. The quantum arrays activated with a sound like crystalline bells, and Fletcher felt the strange sensation of his words being instantly transmitted across light years of space to governments, military commands, and civilian authorities on dozens of worlds. Within hours, automated systems would begin redistributing supplies, freezing accounts, and implementing the most comprehensive supply chain reform in galactic history. Princess Zara beamed at him. Congratulations, Officer Fletcher. You've just prevented a war and saved approximately 2 million lives. How does it feel to be a hero? Fletcher considered this question seriously. Mostly, it feels like I need to use the restroom and update my resume. Well, Queen Lyreley said, extending her hand to shake his. You'll have plenty of time for both. I suspect your new position as Special Audit Coordinator for Intersystem Supply Integrity will keep you quite busy. My new what now? Fletcher asked. Princess Zara patted his shoulder consolingly. Mother forgot to mention that preventing galactic wars through accounting comes with a promotion. Don't worry, the benefits package includes diplomatic immunity and access to really excellent coffee. Fletcher looked down at his ledgers, then at the two remarkable women who had turned his quiet morning into the most important day in recent galactic history, and finally at the Congress Hall where officials were beginning to celebrate or panic, depending on their personal investment portfolios. "Can I keep my backup calculator?" he asked. "Officer Fletcher," Queen Lyreley said with a smile that suggested the universe might occasionally have a sense of humor, "I suspect you're going to need it."